So this series is really evolving from a short survey that was shared with I'll call it a sample of our community. And the survey asks questions like, what are your spiritual interests? What are the spiritual questions that you're holding? What would you share as your spiritual needs? And so there was a lot of good information there to consider. And so, as we're considering this, I also am taking into consideration that we are a contemplative community and how the opportunity to come together and practice has changed and evolved throughout what Thurman would call the vicissitudes of the social situation. We have navigated elections together, pandemics together, and throughout that, the time of practice has looked different ways. And so the question that I am drawing out from today that was shared within that survey is, how do I live out my purpose? And so I think slowing down here, maybe just to be with that question, I'd be curious when you hear that question, how it feels to you. Like, do you notice it landing anywhere? What is it like for you just to hear this question? How do I live out my purpose? And we can begin there. You're welcome to share in the chat or unmute and kind of just share from there. But what happens in you when you hear this question? How do I live out my purpose? What's it feel like?
And you said we can unmute and share?
Please, yes.
Yeah. Um, it's became real clear to me. I guess, as I said, as I moved to Arizona, I can see things a little bit more clearly. But I really feel like my goal, my purpose, and I've talked to God about it, is just to be happy, just
Mm.
being happy. And sometimes you think, oh, can you be happy with so much going on in the world? But he said, but that's what everyone's hoping to be. They want to be happy. If they're in a war-torn country or if they're in this or that, they have to have hope that there's something better and someone needs to be living it. And so be happy and then also help as many people as I can along the way as I'm being happy. Just keep spreading the happiness. But once I realized that, and that, I mean, I kind of knew that even before I moved to Arizona, but honestly, that's my purpose. And of course, there's going to be hard times that come, and he made it very clear you're not, you address the hard times, you use your tools, you dig in, you get it resolved. But honestly, it's just be happy, and help as many people as you can along the way.
Thank you, Farrell. And then in the chat, Dr. Andre shares, there are days when I have to question my purpose. And Brianna says, yes, I start there too. What is my purpose? And I also found the way this question was asked, right? Interesting that I too often start with, what is my purpose? And this question is, how do I live out my purpose? So I hope that our discussion today kind of provides insight or revelation into both of those questions, because I see that they do live together. For me, going through what I would call like vocational crisis, thinking like, oh, I thought that this was my purpose in life, and now there's like this shift, and I feel like I'm supposed to be doing something else, and it feels very disorienting and confusing. And so the question, what is my purpose, for me was a big source of frustration because I felt like I didn't know what my purpose was. And so getting to the question of how do I live out my purpose? Well, that's a challenging one to answer if you are unsure of what your purpose might be. So, my intention with this series is to invite us into an experiment and experience based on community interests, questions, needs, and curiosities. And we've seen the question that we're sitting with today. And I think my hope would be that as we are with these questions together, that we move into a place of being open and receptive, that purpose isn't prescriptive, that the answer to this isn't something that lives outside of us, but it is something that we at any moment can be invited to attune into. So, again, these are the questions that are shaping this series that we asked of you all. What are your spiritual interests, questions, and needs? What spiritual practices are you curious about? And so, as we go forward, I intended to share the survey in our group me. I will share it this week. And so, if you would like to add to it, it wasn't shared, like in our email. It was just shared in one-on-one conversations, and it wasn't meant to exclude anybody. So if you have questions that you would like to add to it, I will go back into the survey throughout this series. So here we are with this question: how do I live out my purpose? What I'd like to do today is return to the verses that we looked at in Genesis with this brand new idea in human history. I also want to be mindful of the time. I want to move then into something that we have looked at before, but sometimes feels foreign, and so much in line with the blessing. Share this reminder that God is a verb. God has often been introduced to us in a variety of ways, and God being a noun and God being a verb are two different things, and moving into this space of remembering God as a verb might help loosen some of the questioning around purpose. And then we'll wind up with you carry medicine, and that's what will lead us into a bit of a contemplative practice. It's not the breath prayer in its entirety, but it is an element of the breath prayer. So that's what we will be with today. So returning to this brand new idea in human history that we started the series with, it comes from Genesis 15. And the verses that I want us to spend time with today, we looked at quite a few of them last Sunday. That replay will be up this week. So if you missed it, it'll be on YouTube and you can return to it. But I want us to sit with these two verses from Genesis 15. This is where God and Abram, God makes a covenant or a promise with Abram. And the verses say, God said, "Bring me a heifer, a goat, and a ram." And when the sun was down and it was dark, a smoking fire pot and flaming torch moved between the split carcasses. So just a refresher, we looked at how Abram receives this direction from God to bring these animals, to cut them in half, and to lay them on the ground. And what we looked at was that this is actually where the term to cut a deal comes from, that this is the way contracts were made. And so Abram doesn't question God in doing this. He just knows because of the culture and the times that what's about to happen is we're about to come into an agreement. And the way that those agreements were typically made is that the two people who were coming into agreement would pass through these carcasses. The belief was if we didn't hold up our end of the contract, may we end up like these animals. So a very drastic way, right, to come into agreement. But it was how it was done at that time. So the thing that we sat with is this brand new idea in that when the sun went down, what passes through the carcasses is a smoking fire pot and a flaming torch. And we know that these things are representation of the divine. That in scripture, when there's reference to smoke or fire, in context, this is kind of alerting the hearer of the story that this is an exchange or what's happening here is some engagement with the divine. And we know this because we also know the story about Moses and the burning bush. So again, just kind of attuning our hearts and our eyes and ears to this signal that's being presented here through the smoke and the fire pot. And so the new idea was that the consciousness around the direction of the relationship between human and divine is being shifted. So the old idea being that people, the direction going towards God, people needed to do something in order to show their faith toward God. So, make a sacrifice, or, we can think of it as like any type of like a transaction, right? So the direction in consciousness at one point, and it still resides in our collective consciousness today, is what do I have to do? What do I have to sacrifice in order to show my faithfulness to God? And this story is shifting that train of thought, because now what it's showing is God is being faithful towards people. And so this brings me to an image that instead of the direction being people towards God, what do I need to do to please God? Now there's this change in consciousness of God actually has interest in being faithful towards people. And so rather than this one directional way of relating, it becomes this meeting, this way of being together in relationship. And so when we think about this brand new idea in human history, and as we sit with elements that are present in contemplative spirituality, that being stillness, silence, and solitude. Yes, Abram did take action, right? He did do as he felt directed and secured these animals for this covenant. But what I want us to kind of be with today and slow down around is at one point, God moves and Abram is still. that there is a point in Abram questioning his purpose and how it will be fulfilled, where he stops moving and God is still moving. And so, as we sit with this idea, I would offer the question for reflection. And also, if you have a response ready to articulate, just kind of sitting with this imagery. What does this mean for you, to you today? This idea of purpose at some point inviting us to be still. So, what does this mean for you today?
Are we meant to reflect silently or answer?
Either or, both, and.
Okay. So when you pose the original question, where you are talking about practice, people of practice, that statement gets me really excited because I've found those all kinds of practices as a way to enter more into the fullness of life. And then you introduce the question of purpose, and it just kind of it stumped me immediately. But then as you portray all of this and say, what does this mean for you today? It brings it back around to, yes, there's rest in just the practice, and the practice might just be being still. And
Mm.
it's really beautiful, full circle.
Thank you, Lisa. I think there is. I have lost the chat, so if you shared in the chat, I apologize. But if there's anyone else that has a response, you're welcome to share it. So, sitting with the question myself, right? What does this mean for you today? As I kind of sit with, and it felt important to me to have some imagery to go with this. This idea of Abram being still and the smoke and the fire engaging in the movement. So, this seems to be a moment where existing, being, is all Abram has to do. That just being, which seems foreign in my both my personal experience and my experience in introducing contemplative practice to people. The question that I often get, especially around centering prayer, is like, okay, but what do I do? And then when you respond and you say, you're you're just being, you're not doing anything, it can be very confusing. It's like, okay, but like, am I like thinking of something? Am I praying a particular prayer? So what I recognize is that part of the human condition is so entrenched with action. Part of our cultural conditioning is so entrenched with action that it becomes difficult to even grasp the idea of being enough. that there must be something else that is required of me. And so I had shared the longer version of this quote from Thomas Keating last week, and I want to kind of narrow it down as a way to kind of speak to this idea of being actually being in action. He says, human effort depends on grace, even as it invites it in. Whatever degree of divine union we may reach bears no proportion to our effort. It is the sheer gift of divine love. So I would invite us to hold on to this image in tandem with this quote, this image of Abram being still, the love and grace of God moving, and no effort being required at this point. That this is an invitation to receive through divine union, so through that relational, the arrows moving toward each other, the gift of divine love. And then kind of going out throughout Genesis 15, the whole point of this interaction is coming from Abram really asking about about purpose. And so we're going to look at that a little bit, and I want to move us into this reminder that God is a verb. So again, the language that gets a little confusing when we're talking about just being. So the one who is being is the name of God. This is the name that God gives. This is how God names God's self. I am the one who is being. And so being is a verb. And so God is a verb. So something about the beingness of the divine and the beingness of the divine within us, and these things finding a meeting place. So the name that he gives himself, we know it as Yahweh, and it means the one who is being. And I thought that this was both a beautiful image and a beautiful connection to this idea of breath. Because the name Yahweh, it is believed, it's not a name that was spoken, it was a name that was breathed. So it was the like, this is the name of the divine. This is how the divine names the divine self. And so as we look back at the consciousness around the direction of the relationship, and we think of this idea of the one who is being, maybe another way to hear this is the one who is breathing, right? Because breath also is a verb, like it's an action. And so the consciousness is changing, and it's this invitation of being to being. So moving toward being with, unboundaried are words that kind of come up. So the question that I ask is, what if Abram's stillness is actually an action that gives him the space and conditions necessary to attune to the frequency of his own essence and the movement of God. The word essence here I'm referring to as the true self. So as I was thinking about this question, which for me sounds kind of like a mouthful even as I'm saying it, there's this image that came up. So I want to share that with you. And as you see it, I would invite you to think of, just continue to hold this idea that Abram is being still and the divine is what's coming into movement to make good on this covenant. So, what if Abram's stillness is actually an action? And as he's being still, there is this movement of the divine that is taking place. And within that movement of the divine, all of the chatter, the questions around purpose that Abram is holding begins to settle down. So the noise begins to settle. And the essence of who he is has the opportunity to rise up and remember or hear the frequency of the divine as it moves. So now I'm kind of doing my best to use language that refers to energy. And so the movement of this infinity symbol to me seems like the infinite in Abram rises through the noise of his questioning and remembers the infinite within the divine. And Roz talked in the blessing about the conversation that she shared with Bryant in saying when it's time for the tangible. And so I'm referring to the unmanifest as we're sitting with this idea of how do I live out my purpose? Because this is kind of, I see this at the heart of part of what Abram is asking of the divine in Genesis 15. He's essentially saying, like, you've promised me heirs. You've promised me these things tied to my purpose, and none of this has manifest yet. So beneath the surface of the question, I also sense, he's asking about purpose. He's looking for the material evidence. He says in Genesis 15, essentially, that I don't have any offspring, and the way that my life is set up right now, it looks like my heir is actually going to be a servant in my household. And the divine redirects him and says, look at the stars. Abram's holding this question like, where's the evidence? These things have not manifest. And we're coming into an agreement here. And so I bring us back to this question, ask for material evidence connected to purpose, and then remind us that in this exchange, there comes a point where Abram is still and God moves. And so maybe holding a little curiosity around either the image of that or the feeling of that, that there's these questions around this purpose and the unmanifest, and where is the evidence? And it is at that moment where nothing is required of Abram, and the divine begins moving. Not that the divine ever stopped moving, but there's this beautiful imagery that I think is a gift for us to be with. Dr. Liza Rancow says our purpose is first about who we be. Being finds expression through whatever we do. Each of us carries medicine, and the medicine is everywhere. The first line of that sentence, our purpose is first about who we be. This hasn't been the way that we have been taught to greet each other. It sounds even kind of cumbersome. If you were to meet somebody, the question that they ask you is probably not going to be, so tell me about who you be. It's more about, who are you? What do you do? And so this is a different type of posture that we're being invited to remember. And that this being then is what finds expression through whatever we do. And she goes on to say, each of us carries medicine, and the medicine is everywhere. And so this brings me to the medicine, and the medicine that we all carry, the medicine that you carry, and this question, how do I live out my purpose? The question, how do I live out my purpose? I'm not speaking in absolutes here, but there is probably a high probability that the question resides in like the intellect or the head center. It may be arising from the gut or the heart as a curiosity, but there may also be a point where it just lives in the head. I shared kind of my own frustrations around purpose. Like, I don't know what my purpose is, and as I say that, like, it just lives here. There's no, there really wasn't any like depth to it that I was aware of. And part of the invitation in being people of practice might be looking at another way to hold that question. So I don't know if it feels any different to you to go from how do I live out my purpose to looking at it from a medicinal way. So the question being, how am I present to the medicine I carry? Purpose can sometimes feel very tied to like capitalism, like it's something that needs to result in a product or something that is tangible. But medicine is something that is, it just, to me at least, it feels more inviting. So how am I present to the medicine I carry? And I also hope that that kind of helps move the question from living only in the head to being aware of how this medicine is everywhere, as Dr. Liza says. And so moving from purpose to medicine, also keeping in mind, and how do I say this? That this doesn't mean that you're being present to your medicine doesn't mean that your medicine is for everybody, right? That there is a level of self-awareness. As I was kind of finishing up this morning, the image came of like simplifying this, in the world of medicine, a doctor doesn't just prescribe every medicine for everybody, right? So there's like a filter that goes through, that this prescription goes through. There's questions about what's happening internally, externally, what is the environment. And so maybe just applying that same kind of logic to being present to the medicine that you carry. What are the conditions? And then ultimately, as Dr. Liza says, being aware of the medicine, being connected to who the purpose of who you be, then the medicine overflows is the best way I can think of to articulate this. So being finds expression through whatever we do. So how am I present to the medicine I carry, and letting being, the ground of our being, the essence of who we are, inform how, when, with whom the medicine is shared. And so the breath prayer is a practice and a portal to the medicine you carry. And it also can become this place of expansion that takes this question. Let's just share the two questions because they've both come up. What is my purpose? And how do I live out my purpose? The breath can help move this question around the intelligence centers. And I'm drawing from the Enneagram for this. So, including the intelligence of the head, including the intelligence of the body, and including the intelligence of the heart as a way to make holistic, informed decisions about the medicine that you carry. I think in my heart, this idea of purpose seems very not only connected to being who we be, but presence. So that purpose and the now are in deep relation with each other. And I think it's there. I can't remember. There's a question in the Gospels about eternity, and so this moment here being connected to eternity. That this is an eternal now. So if I can be the one who is being and connected to this moment, connected to the aware of the medicine within me, then purpose is less about finding like the gold at the end of a rainbow. It's more about like being present in this moment. And so as we close and move into this idea of stepping into the breath prayer, and I'm also keeping in mind this question of like that I get that sometimes like, well, what are we doing? I want to invite us to engage the breath as a way to maybe hold these questions within all of our intelligences. So that's what I'll invite us to do. I'm also going to stop sharing at this point because I know there's some things in the chat I couldn't see. And I think I saw someone unmute. So if you have a question or something you'd like to share with us before we go into a moment of breathing together, feel free.
I
That
just
was me. Oh, go ahead, Lisa.
I just wanted to see the quote again. I was taking a screenshot of the quote where it says the medicine is everywhere.
Mm-hmm.
Sorry then. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Love that. That's me. It's all you, Andrea.
Okay, thanks, Lisa. And thanks, Tia, for the reminder. Um, I think about when I was in high school, and I don't know if any of you ever felt this, but when you're planning to exit high school, people are always asking, what are your plans? What are your goals? What are you going to do? And that question caused me to feel anxious. And
Mm.
I started to say, I'm just planning to breathe. I'll just be breathing. And honestly, I'm thinking about it now, when I moved through that space of I'm just going to breathe, I was more present with myself and being and more present with God, and thinking, reflecting back, my life was more enjoyable, peaceful, pleasant for me. But as I began to mature, and listening to coaches or different spaces or being in the self-development spaces, I started to hear you need to have goals, you need to have this, you need to 5-year goals, 10-year, and that still today makes me like, ugh, like vibrate in a way that I don't like. And so I'm like, oh, I need to go back to just breathing and being in that space. And now that I'm in full-time as a full-time therapist and self-development work, it is very hard for people that are desire to heal and be better to sit in a space of being. It's a constant churn of what do I need to do? What do I need to do? And racing from this book to this class to this practice. And when I say just be with yourself, sometimes I'm met with, well, what does that mean? How do I do that? And it's definitely tied to the performance of capitalism and being useful, that if you're not actively doing something or progressing toward some type of goal, then you're not worthy, or you can't ask or receive or have. So I just wanted to add that. Thanks for the message, Tia.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing.
May I chime in right here, please?
Yes.
Andrea, yes, everything you just said, me too. And you and I are the same age and therefore grew up in the same era, which is why it was so revolutionary at Lamar High School on Westheimer in circa 1986 for June Smith, who had a whole PhD from Berkeley, but she let us call her by her first name. So that tells you a lot about how she rolled. Very iconoclastic, outside the box. And she, in our humanities class that semester, she had us to keep a journal. And every now and then we had to turn it in and she would just, read through whatever, da da da. And at the very end of the semester, we knew we would have an essay question. We didn't know where she would pull from. It could have been any topic that we had explored the entire semester. And to my surprise and delight, she wrote this quote by Matthew Arnold as our prompt. And it was from my journal for her class. And I was reminded of the quote because of your talk today, Pastor Tia. And it says, life is not about having and getting, it's about being and becoming. And she had a classroom of teenagers to write about this. And I was relieved that she pulled from something I'd already, thought about from my journal, but because she could have gone from anywhere. And she was a really, like, till this day, we continue to like reflect and think about how she taught. And I was reminded of that in listening to everything, especially also what Andrea just shared. And till this day, I still cringe. What do you do? Because it's tied to everything you said, plus just I think the inclination for people to put you in some sort of box or see what to do, what they can make or judge from whatever the response is. So thank you for the breathing response, Andrea. So thank you.
You're
Thank you.
welcome.
Thank you, Roz.
And
Yeah.
just for an experiment as a mature person, one time someone asked what I do, and I named like, oh, yoga, journaling. Like I just started naming, walking my dogs, and they looked so confused.
Yeah. Yeah, it's I could see how that could happen.
Yeah, one quick thing. A friend of mine spent some time in Spain a few years ago, a couple of years ago, and she shared how very American that question is, and that people in her navigating through Spain, people were not asking that, and really found it odd that that is how we greeted each other here. And it was
Mm,
like very interesting. Yeah.
yeah. Thank you all.
Yeah, I love the conversation. I I think I dance on both sides. Um I'm so proud of the work that I get to do, so I don't necessarily mind sharing it and talking about it because oftentimes people are also dumbfounded of that a Black woman is so decorated. So there's that. So I get a kick out of it. Um, but then there's also, I think we've had this conversation before, the connection between um, presence and purpose, or maybe it's been in other times, but I can't remember if it was the awakenings. I don't know. I feel like we've had this conversation before, but it did stick with me on um, just what is the purpose, what is our purpose in the present moment. And sometimes the purpose in the present moment is, as Andrea said, to breathe
Mm,
or to just be. Sometimes the purpose in the present moment is to mother, is to rest. Um, Sometimes the purpose in the present moment is to take action, um, and to, push back or to resist. And I think that's just an ever changing, ever evolving thing that is not a one time, one size fits all, once in a lifetime for our whole life answer.
hmm. Thank you, Q.
Can I chime in again, please?
Yes, Roz.
I really appreciate what Kiana just said because that also takes me to the power of prayer. When we say pray for such in it, or when you think in the socio larger terms, praying for fill in the blank, and it's like I think what we're saying in the contemplative practice, like what Lisa was saying, in the sitting in the being and being with what the prayer is and the power of that, I think we sometimes lose that element of it. Not just the power of praying, but the fact that we're sometimes tuning in to be with what the prayer is. And one reason I'm noodling on that is because of where I think it was where Marbury left us last week with the prayer request that he lifted up.
Mm-hmm.
It, and I'm not trying to take us into all that, but it did continue to reverberate with me and within me, and with a question of, well, what is the prayer? What are we praying as it relates to what he lifted up? I'm reminded of that because of what Kiana just said. Like in any given moment, things can shift for what that moment may call for us to be. And I think it's like going back to the practice aspect of it to tune into what that is in that moment for that time and space.
I love that. And I think it reminds us that that can't happen without our connection to the divine, that that can't happen in and of, in and of us separate from the divine and spirit,
Mhm.
that we're always being invited to tune in to understand what our purpose in prayer is in that moment.
Mhm. And that's what yields the effectiveness, because you're not just out there willy-nilly. How Jesus said, when he told he sent, was it, I don't know if they were disciples or apostles at that point, but I can't remember when he said, and don't go until I send you with this power, you know,
Mm,
be out there in the street on those dusty roads.
thank you. Thank you all. And that feels like a good entry point into breathing together. Um, and that brings me back to the title of the series overall, which is People of Practice. Um, Often, let me not say that. So, my hope is that as we engage in this together, what I know to be the fruits of contemplative practice is that the fruits of the practice start to show up outside of the practice. So, in centering prayer, for example, that's a recommended 20-minute period of stillness, silence, and solitude. That 20 minutes of stillness, silence, and solitude begins to manifest itself in certain ways when it comes to our day-to-day interaction. So as I'm listening to both, Andrea, Kiana, and Roz, I'm reminded of like this moment matters, breathing together matters, because when we move out of this moment, there's still something that is living here that we have access to, which feels like the ofness of the name of this series. Like People of Practice is the space where the practice and the fruits of it manifest in the areas outside of the practice. And so we're going to take a moment to just do that, to lean into what what Andrea shared here, that just breathing, and find ourselves in this imaginative space where maybe for just a moment we are still, like Abram was. Doesn't mean that his questions, his mind got quiet. It doesn't mean that necessarily anything changed immediately within him, but that spirit, God, continued to move. And so we'll take a moment to breathe together into those intelligent centers. James Finley often says at the end of a practice period, he talks about the thread of awareness remaining, that the prayer is that this moment, this thread will remain, and that we'll be aware of it outside of this moment. So that being said, I would invite you, if you're in a place where you can put your feet on the ground, you're welcome to just do that as a way to connect with the earth. And then the broader invitation is really just to sense into your body and any adjustments that you may need to make towards comfort. And becoming aware of the sounds around you. And eventually letting your eyes come to a close or letting your gaze fall on something that is still. Moving your awareness to your breath. Becoming aware of your own inhale and exhale. That in this moment, our response to purpose, what you'll do, the medicine you carry, is to just be. And then guiding the breath into the intelligence center known as the mind. So taking a deep breath and filling up the head. And trusting the body's intelligence and releasing, softening with your exhale. And continuing to draw the breath into the mind and letting it find its way out. Being with your breath and also being with your thoughts. Seeing if you can be with your thoughts without judgment. Just guiding the breath into the mind. And exhaling. And then on your next breath, breathing into your heart space. If the mind stays busy, that's okay. You can imagine that you breathe into the mind, and on the exhale, imagine that the mind falls and meets the heart. And let that be the space that you breathe into. Remembering that as you breathe into the heart, there is intelligence here, there is wisdom here, there is medicine here. There may also be emotions here. So this is a moment to draw the breath into everything that is present in the heart. And then allowing the breath to expand deep into the belly. So it's a deep breath in, the belly fills up. Beyond the belly, the body fills up. So if it helps to imagine that the bowls of your hips receive this breath, your legs, knees, feet, entire body, to the crown of your head. If it takes a few inhales to bring the breath into the fullness of who you are, then take as many breaths as needed. And then eventually letting that awareness find its way to the area of your belly. If you're holding your breath at all, then deep inhale into the belly, letting it expand. And as you exhale, seeing if you can invite a little more softness into the belly. That there is wisdom here too. There is medicine here too. So as we hold these questions about purpose, may we remember the access that we have to the wisdom within all of our areas of intelligence. That the mind, the heart, and the gut are all deeply connected to the wisdom and consciousness of Christ. And that as each of us sits here still, the flame and the smoke move. And God, we thank you for this moment to be, to breathe, to be present. We thank you that you are the one who is being, and that that being is not separate from us. That it is deeply connected to our essence. And so as we move forward from this time and this space, may the action that we take be deeply connected to this essence. May we remember that grace does not require effort. We thank you that there is action in stillness. And we pray that this thread of awareness remain, that at any moment we can just breathe. And may our being continue to inform the actions that we take. And we move from this moment with an inhale and an exhale, remembering that every breath is the name of the divine. And it is in the love and energy of Christ that we pray and say amen. And taking a moment to return whenever and however feels best to you. Thank you all for being here. And we'll transition briefly to our offering moment and then move to prayer requests before we log off. And so sharing a quick update. I lost my mouse. Let's see if I can find it. Here it is. of the ways to give. So there is, as you know, I think everybody here knows, there is now a text to give option from Secure Give. The way that that works is you text Awaken the amount you would like to give to this number, 832-481-4434, and it will populate a message back to you to confirm your gift. You can also give through Secure Give as a platform itself. It is an app, and it can be found on our website, awakeningsinc.org, and we also have Venmo. On Venmo, we are Awakenings-Inc., and on Cash App, we're Awakenings Movement. Our June budget is $5,359. And thank you to the generosity of each of you in our community. Our June budget is, or our giving is currently at $2,317. So, as always, sharing reminders that it is our collective giving, it's our collective presence, it is our collective medicine that helps to make Awakenings what it is. And if you are in a place where you can contribute financially to the mission and vision of Awakenings without strain on your own responsibilities or household, know that it is received with generosity and always stewarded with intention and gratitude. So thank